All right, welcome everybody. I think we'll get started with some with the agenda and just some first slides while we keep seeing people pop in, but we'll get going and we'll tell you all about this project and hopefully be able to answer all of your questions. And we are on webinar mode today, which is why you all can't see each other because we're going to be recording this and we're going to post it. There were a lot of people, different time zones that couldn't make it in the middle of their day. So don't worry if you're in your pajamas still. No one will see you and your privacy will remain intact, but we'll be able to record this and share it out with everybody. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and we'll start the recording part now. So our agenda for today is we'll just do some quick icebreaker polls and see who all has joined us and learn a little more about you. And we'll talk about who is PAReNts. So what is PAReNts? This is the funding organization that is supporting this project and why this is all made possible. We'll talk about what was PAReNts 1.0. This project is called PAReNts 2.0, and for those who are joining for the first time and weren't involved the first time around, we want to give you a little background so you understand what we've done so far and why we're so excited that we did get the funding for this project, because we have great things in store for 2.0. Our co-project lead, Dr. Audrey Thurm, is on with us today, and she will talk more about the background on that project, specifically on outcome measurement tools and how they relate to the core outcome set that we created in the first project. And then we'll give you all the details on how you can sign up, what it means to be a participant, and where to go on the website to apply. And then we will be going to the Q&A. You all should have access to a little Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So as questions pop into your mind, just jump down there, post them, and we'll be sure to answer all those questions at the end of the meeting. So first icebreaker poll, Emily, if you want to launch the poll, which disorder are you representing today? So which disorder affects your loved one and is the reason for your participation? And then did you participate in the first PAReNts project? We had quite a few folks come back, and while we wait for everybody to answer these questions, I did want to just talk a little bit about what it was like to be in that first project. We did not have webinar mode. We had cozy, see each other's faces mode, and we met every month. Part of this project is that you will get a month where you are going to talk to the group just a little bit. We'll help prepare you for that, but it was the most wonderful project. Every month we all got to know each other better and better. And we ended every call, it seemed like, with, oh, I can't believe how much our kids have in common. You know, my child has GAMP, your child has CTD, and everything you said was resonating with me. It was just really cool to see how much we had in common and to also learn from others who, you know, maybe had older children and more experience, and to share our viewpoints. So everyone kind of talked about it as a group therapy, and I hope that you all that decide to participate will feel the same. Emily, can you share the results from that? Okay, so we have mostly CTD parents and a couple of GAMPed, and we have 60% who participate in the first project. So you all know what I'm talking about, but like I said, we have a lot of people who weren't able to make it live. So thanks for being on and listening to all of this and participating. And we'll look forward to hopefully welcoming a lot of you into this project. Next slide, Emily. Okay, one more quick icebreaker. Which 3 emojis do you use the most? Which ones are in your phone? If you look in there right now, what did you just text to your friends? What's rising to the top? I'm going to take the poll too. Oh, I can't vote. I'm not allowed to vote. All right, pick three. And Emily, you want to go ahead and close it? We'll see what's rising to the top.
We still have quite a few people who are
That
voting.
haven't answered. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Emily and I did a little research before we made this slide, and we noticed that our personal phones had very different most frequently used emojis versus our ACD phones or our ACD Slack, which was mostly number 13. Check, check, check. And number 11. All right, it is by a landslide, hearts and laughing, followed by a good amount of thumbs up. All right, awesome. Thanks, everybody. And I see we've got quite a few people on now. So, okay, so about PAReNts. PAReNts is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. They are an independent nonprofit, and they seek to empower patients and others with actionable information about their health and healthcare choices. They are the leading funder of patient-centered comparative clinical effectiveness research in the US. And comparative effectiveness research means comparing two or more medical treatments, services, or health practices to help patients and other stakeholders make better informed decisions. What does all of that mean? PAReNts is the leader in funding folks to get the parents, the patients, the people living the day-to-day with disorders, elevating their experience and having an active role in the process of moving towards treatments and developing drugs. And we want to acknowledge PAReNts' support in this project. And if you want to learn more, you can visit their website, PAReNts.org. Next slide. So what do we mean by patient engagement in research? A quote from PAReNts says, engagement is the meaningful involvement of patients, caregivers, clinicians, and other relevant stakeholders. We want to make sure that all decisions, all trial designs, all outcomes selected, that they have the patient front and center in there, and that they're not misinformed and irrelevant, but that they have been thoughtfully created around the patient experience. And that's why we are engaging in the research process. Next slide. So why are we going to be at the research table? Why is it important that each of you are here today and willing to give up your time and participate in this project? It's because we bring something really unique to the table that is important and missing without us. Our passion, our expertise, our credibility, and our perspective because of our lived experience. Next slide. So what happened in PAReNts 1.0? What are we building upon? Our aim in the first project, which ran from early 2022 to wrapping up just at the very beginning of this year, and the manuscript from everything we found is going to a peer-reviewed journal as we speak for publishing. That long process was all around developing a core outcome set, and sometimes we call that a COS of 8 to 10. So that's kind of your goal. You don't want it to be too big and overwhelming, but you want it to be thorough enough to really represent patients and their experience and what is the most important to them. 8 to 10 outcomes. And in this project, it was for CTD and GAMT to ensure consistent evaluation of therapies using clinician and patient-derived meaningful outcomes. So how did we do that? Well, first we reviewed what evidence existed. We reviewed the literature And the patient reported priorities from the patient registry. We had a focus group at the 2022 symposium and asked parents there about meaningful outcomes. And then we took all of these findings, boiled them down, and sent them out to the entire community. We asked everyone to please share this with your healthcare providers. We invited the researchers in the space, and we had responses from around the world, a really good participation rate, and people whittled away over 3 surveys to where we were able to go to a consensus workshop with parents who had participated in this project for the last 2 years, and an equal number of researchers and healthcare providers. And we met in person, we sat across the table, we went over the results from all of those surveys. We expressed our priorities and feelings about these outcomes, and we arrived at a final list. Next slide, please. We arrived at these 8 outcomes. And if you're thinking for CTD and GAMT, well, those are, they're different. And did you account for that? We really did. We accounted for that during the focus group and during the literature review and during the Delphi survey. Everyone was asked if their child had CTD or GAMT. The clinicians were even asked to explain their ratings and if they applied to CTD or GAMT. And we really found that they were quite congruent and quite complementary. And there's a couple of asterisks that there are some differences, that some of these are more or less relevant to CTD or GAMT. But overall, we came to a short list of 8 outcomes. And this is why we're here today, is because we want to build upon this and not just tell people who are going to research these disorders, please measure these outcomes. We've been very thorough and thoughtful, and this is very representative of the patient experience, these 8 outcomes, but also please measure them correctly in a way that we're using a tool that is appropriate for the participants. And that may be a lot of information. It may be that we're suggesting considerations for if patients were diagnosed early or late with GAMT, or if patients with CTD are male or female, or more severely or less severely affected. This is a research project, so we're very open-minded and we don't know what we're going to find in the end, but we're excited to find it together with all of you, and that it's going to involve the patients all along the way. And next slide, please. So PAReNts 2.0, like I said, this is building upon the first project. It started 5 days ago, and we have 2 years to complete this. Our primary objective is to develop considerations for CTD and GAMT outcome measurement tools as a companion to our CTD and GAMT core outcome set. We will also expand our expert panel series, recruiting new caregivers, that's you here today, and subject matter experts to offer fresh and diverse perspectives. So we'll be working with all of you, we'll be working with clinicians, we'll be working with industry and policymakers. And one reason to do that is to get a lot of diverse perspectives. And another reason to do that is to make sure that we're moving in a direction that in the end, the FDA is going to find compatible with their rules, and that we've been going in the right direction this whole time. So next slide, please. So why are we doing this? I kind of explained this. We want to ensure meaningful changes in a clinical trial are recognized. Tools used to assess patient outcomes are sensitive enough to capture changes, and a clinical trial does not fail due to the use of a subpar measurement tool. So we know we like these 8 outcomes. We know they're relevant. We know they're important. And there's some examples in other disorders that have gone to clinical trials and not had great tools used to measure the outcomes. for their children, and the drug failed, even though the parents were really happy. One example is the walk test, and that it's been used sometimes in communities where the caregivers and the patients are going, that's not even relevant to me. I don't care if I can walk faster at the end of this trial. Here are the things that are important to me, and you didn't even measure them. And another is a trial that failed where a very seemingly small adaptive function of being able to potty train, they saw a lot of the patients make huge progress while on the drug, and they were sitting on the toilet and they were pulling up their own pants, and these were things that the parents were just shocked that they were doing, and that drug failed, and the parents were very disappointed because they could see these big improvements, but they weren't captured because they weren't measured, because the scope of the tools used just wasn't right for that population. So we're trying to prevent anything bad happening and capture the good and have good accurate results in trials. Next slide. How are we going to do this? We're gathering a cohort of caregivers. We're going to train all of you. We're going to meet every month. We're going to give you background on all of this. But in the end, I don't want anyone to leave this call feeling intimidated, like, oh, we're using terms that you're not familiar with and you think you need to be an expert, and so maybe you're not a good fit. Everyone who's here today who's raising a child or adult with GAMT or CTD is an expert, and you will make a valuable contribution throughout the course of this project. How another approach we're taking is we're going to identify patient-centered, clinically meaningful differences in the core outcome set. So we're going to look at each of the outcomes, and we're going to say, for example, expressive communication. Well, what does that mean for you? Does that mean just would a small meaningful difference for your child be that they gesture? Would it be that they start using their AAC device? Would it be that they can say more than one word together? Like, what is it? Because it can be very different for every patient, and we want to capture either that, hey, this is what we're usually seeing, or hey, this is what we're usually seeing all over. These meaningful differences are never the same, and maybe what we're promoting is the idea that we have a very diverse community, and we need a very lenient clinical trial design. But we'll see where we get across these next 2 years. Collect and analyze feedback from caregivers and subject matter experts on appropriate outcome measurement tool considerations. So we're going to have like a focus group with all of you in November, and we're going to be capturing this clinically meaningful differences from you in each of the outcomes. We're going to get it from subject matter experts, and then we're also going to have a big community-wide survey again, just to have that pulse of the community check that we've all gone in the right direction, and that everyone gets a chance to have a voice in this as well. So even if you don't end up being a part of the program, maybe you're not able to make the commitment, you'll be able to be involved in the community survey. Lastly, we're going to recruit industry and policymakers to actively participate in our expert panel series and ensure the end product of this project has support from these important partners. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Audrey Thurm to introduce herself and share some great information. Thanks, Audrey.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon here, but maybe morning for some. Heidi, can everybody hear?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, great. I'm Audrey Thurm, and I am really thrilled to be here and be part of this. I was part of the first project, but in a more peripheral role, but I'm really, really glad to be more involved here with this. So I am a clinical psychologist. My focus has been on children, but I see adults also. And just a bit about my background as it maybe helps give you understanding of my involvement with this is I work at NIH and I work as a clinical researcher. So I'm a psychologist first and wanting to help patients, but I work in clinical research, which is all, every patient I see is involved in research, but it's all clinical in nature. So we're trying to also help kids in the here and now when we do that. And I hope any research we do can do that. And I work with a whole variety of genetic conditions that all have neurodevelopmental problems that are part of it. So some, Down syndrome, Williams syndrome, Fragile X are maybe more known for that, but a lot of them are actually metabolic conditions, mitochondrial conditions, so creatine transport has fallen into that as one of these metabolic conditions that really is actually quite neurodevelopmental in problems that parents find important. And so I was involved in a drug company that started a natural history study that we started, I guess, more than 5 years ago now. And then this project sort of came a little bit out of that. And so I have a lot of familiarity with a lot of these measures that I've used for a long time because they exist, and using them in natural history studies, but also in treatment trials. And so some of the failures that Heidi was talking about, I have lived through myself. So we're trying to work on better measures now, but we have to sort of work with what we have existing now. And I also want to note for everybody that that I'm also an aunt of a child who has significant neurodevelopmental issues. So I have not the lived experience of a parent, but at least of a family member. So I want all of these treatments here and now, like PAReNts, and that's in the forefront of my mind a lot. So next slide. So a lot of this, because parents weren't at the table for a very long time, Congress actually passed legislation that mandates the FDA, who are the people who approve drugs and sort of approve the trials to get to those drugs, to have this whole effort called patient-focused drug development, meaning that researchers can't just say, hey, this is a condition, here's the drug, and this is how we're going to measure the outcome and do all these trials without including parents along the way, caregivers, and the patients themselves when possible. So there's a whole series of guidances about helping researchers do that. This is actually still pretty new, so we're figuring out how to do this, and I think that Heidi and the foundation here has really been pioneers in doing these grants that are helping us figure out these processes. Next slide. So this, you do not need to memorize any of this, but this is sort of what the FDA is putting out as a roadmap, these are the things that you need to do to create what they're calling clinical outcome assessments. It's assessments that would be used in clinical trials that could show proof that a drug is working. So again, Heidi gave some great examples of things that have been used, but they are measures. You have to measure. So if it's like knee surgery, it's that your knee is bending better afterwards, or certainly cancer, that your tumor's smaller. A lot of those are made for more sort of traditional medicine, and a lot of what we need to do together is figure out how to do this for pediatric conditions where neurodevelopment, walking, those are the outcomes, because they're talking about identifying what the concepts are, and that's what was really done in the first project of identifying really primary. There was 80, 100, there were many outcomes, but what are the most priorities? Again, others will be measured too, and the ones that were picked may not actually be the primary outcomes for studies, but what's important here, as in the concept of the conditions. And then how do we measure it? Do we use the child to measure it? Do they have to do direct testing? Can it be the parents as sort of observers? Is it the clinician who has to be the one to observe it? And how do we pick those? Do we use existing measures, or do we need to create new ones? These are all things that we're going to be thinking about along the way in this project. Next slide. So I am not going to go into the details, but the term psychometrics, or sort of like the statistics behind the measurements that we have and why it takes so long for us to develop and validate measures, is because the FDA wants, and I think we all want, to have the measures have certain features to them, which means that we have to study those measures for a long time before putting them in trials. And some of those concepts are what we call reliability, which is that if the measurements are going to be the same no matter who does it, if I do it or a clinician in California does it, that we're going to come up with the same score. Or if parents do it, that they're going to, or even if two different parents do it in a family, that they're going to come up with, similar scores. So that's sort of the arrows going the same place. And then validity is that we want the arrows to go to the target that we care about. So if we care about movement, is it what we care about, and is it the same thing that we're talking about? So is it walking faster, or is it being able to actually do motor movements functionally? And are we talking about the same thing, and can we measure it? And so that's why all of these, but especially this one, has to involve the patients and caregivers, because we need to know, are we talking about the thing that is meaningful? And the last one, and the hardest one, especially when there's a lot of variability in the population, which we think is probably the case in CTDs, is are we going to be able to see change? So if we're talking about going from, not toileting at all to being totally toilet trained, being not needing any help wiping or ever asking to go to the bathroom, are we going to see those change, or do we need to make it more granular? Is maybe success going to be just, being able to go on the toilet sometimes? And so it is definitely the patients, the caregivers, who have to define what is responsive enough for us to think that a drug is worth it, the cost benefit analysis, or the benefit, versus cost of, the drug, the study, and also just doing any intervention over time. So I hope that helps you think about what we mean by these assessments, and what would make them good for both the families and the regulations, the people who are making the decisions. Next. Thank you. So some more terms, and again, this is not a test and this is not to memorize, but it's just to get us thinking about that there are measures. So like maybe it's like, an IQ test might be a measure that measures cognition, right? That, a kid sits down for an hour and does puzzles, does things, and that's the measure itself that we're thinking about. And the FDA really wants us to think about how patients feeling. Do they feel better? Do they have less pain? Are there less seizures? Functions, and I think this is the one that we really care about, right? Are they able to communicate what they're trying to say? Are they able to go to the bathroom? Are they able to dress themselves? All those kinds of things, or survives when it's a fatal disease. And so that's sort of how the measure is being used. Then we've got the score of the measure, and that's important for trials, because the trial is all about, is the score better? Is it higher? Is it better? Is it changed enough? And then we also have to think about these as endpoints. Is this going to go on forever? Are we going to measure this throughout lifetime? Is it just going to be about a year that we're going to be thinking about the intervention, or is it going to be many years? And that's been a problem with some of the trials that we won't be able to tackle totally here, but some of them have been so short because they can only pay for something to happen for a short time, when maybe for what we're talking about, things like toileting, communication, it may take a lot longer. So just keeping that in mind too, of when we're going to do these measures. Next slide. Okay, so now to dig into the actual set that was picked in the project, in the first part of the project. So I'm going to just kind of talk about what those are and what we've thought about them as so far. And I'm kind of curious what's in your mind about what those things are. And then we're going to try to come together in the project about what we mean and how to measure them. So next. So again, this is the core outcome set that was decided on by some of you, very much so. Today, I'm just going to talk about the first 5 that are really very much so neurodevelopmentally focused. We are going to tackle the last 3, but in different ways in the project. So next. So I talked about functioning as something the FDA cares about. And the term adaptive functioning is just meaning like you're doing it in real life, not just in theory. And so there's lots of words on here, but it really is the idea of adaptive functioning is that it's about having competency, being able to do this for yourself independently, coping with the demands of everyday life and adjustment. And by the way, you know, that means, what does that mean for a 2-year-old and what does that mean for an 80-year-old are very different things. But we can just generally think about them as practical skills. So when we've been talking about toileting and dressing, those are practical skills or activities of daily living or daily living skills. Then there's conceptual, like actually being able to read, write, talk, you know, do things out in the world that require concepts. And then social skills is another one of, you know, like being able to, you know, go out there, talk to people without, you know, being worried about gullibility, things like that, and developing the ability to problem solve and communicate in the world. And so it helps us to be thinking about this for all kinds of interventions, including school. We use these in school interventions, certainly in special ed. Next slide. So I just want to put out there, because intellectual disability was actually talked about a lot in Project One as an outcome. And I just want to show that actually adaptive functioning is a huge piece of the ID criteria. And so we're actually talking about ID when we're talking about adaptive behavior or functioning, because it's sort of half of the criteria for that condition. So we're talking about that in terms of, without support, you're diagnosed with intellectual disability when your deficits in these areas limit your functioning. Again, when you're 3, it means that you can't really go to school on your own. You might need help at school. When you're, you know, 20, it means that you're not able to work or go to college, that you need help with functioning. So that's what it means sort of in practical terms. Next slide. And so this is a ton of words on here, but I just want to show that some of you whose kids have been diagnosed with intellectual disability, there are different levels of severity for ID. There's mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And those levels can change over time. And we actually hope that maybe changing them would be an outcome for some of these trials. But in the bottom line about them is that those levels are based on adaptive functioning. And so I think we can all think about, you know, our own kids or families, you know, about mild, meaning that someone just needs a little bit of assistance, maybe teaching them how to do it, but then they can go out and do these things on their own, like cooking, shopping, things like that. Moderate is if the child needs more time and practice, but maybe they can do it with a little assistance over a long period of time. But then we've gotten severe and profound, where the child will need ongoing support to do things. They really can't be home alone. They really need the support. Again, not when they're 5, but when they're teenagers and on. But even when they're 5, it means that they need help with every step of these things. And then profound is really when, you know, you can't leave the person alone for even a minute or so, because they just, you know, need help with every step of the way. Just kind of trying to put that in some terms. Then next slide. So that's the concept of it, and we've got measures for it. We don't need to go into details here, but we can say that we use some of these measures in the natural history study of CTD, and there's other measures that that haven't been used, but they all kind of ask parents or caregivers, does your child actually do these things in life? We can talk later about the details about whether they go into enough detail about these things. They allow for parents to say, yeah, they do it sometimes or with help. Those are things that we need to dive into a lot more, but I just want to just put out there that there are measures that we have used a little bit, so we've got some data on them for this population. Next. And there's some other measures that have been used in other studies that all get at the same thing. What is the child doing in real life? And can the caregiver tell us not just about what happens when we're in the clinic, which may, for a testing visit, which may be an hour, but what are they doing really at home? Because that's what we're trying to get at is what's happening in real life. Next. So then cognitive functioning was chosen as another one. And I showed you in the intellectual disability criteria, half of it is about adaptive functioning. The other thing is about cognitive functioning. And cognitive functioning is not something that we can get at about what someone's doing every day without just really like following them around at school. So what we do is we do these IQ tests or developmental tests that we know are limiting because they're really just about what can the child do for an hour, either at school or in a clinic. And they get at skills that are not those real life functioning skills, but skills that we think will predict that. And so things like puzzles, vocabulary, how fast they can do certain things. And again, we know these are not perfect, but they're measures, they're estimates of these things to really try to predict how they're going to learn in school and out in the real world. So next. So we don't need to go into the details, but some of you may have seen these tests that your children have done. And I think the only thing that I want to point out here is that they have different terms for what they're actually measuring. And some of those different terms are because we do different things when we're preschoolers. When at preschoolers, we might not really be thinking about, fully vocabulary yet or fully, the ability to do reasoning. So we're going to call it different things. And then when you're older, we might call it fluid reasoning or processing speed, things that we can use to predict how we're going to do on tests at school and things like that. Next slide. And so again, we're just showing here that we've tested these a little bit in some of the in the natural history study for CTD. So that's going to give us some data, and that publication's coming out soon, so we can help get the experts from that study to help us think about what we saw, what variability we saw, and that will help us in some ways to think about whether these measures will be good for clinical trials. Next. And this just shows another study that was used that you may have learned about. Next slide. And even more so, but we don't need to go into details here. Okay, so then moving into emotion dysregulation. I think that's like a fancy term for a lot of things. And it really means that your ability to control your emotions, which, as I said, 2-year-olds are not doing this very well. That's part of development, but they are able to do it to some degree. If you can't take your preschooler to a restaurant ever, if they just cannot control themselves, the tantrums are so bad, then you get help at that age. But by the time you're 5, a child should be able to control themselves to the point that they are in school and not needing to be removed all the time. And then as kids get older, it's more about anxiety and depression and really being able to not have outbursts and not need support all day long with these things. So it's a very general term and it means a lot, but I think it came up in different ways for a lot of parents in Project One. So we're using this general term, but we're going to dig into what it means for everybody as we go through this. Next slide. And there are some measures that have been used that are not great, but they get at things like irritability, how withdrawn the person is, how hyperactive they are, and some other kind of ideas. And more recently, a measure was developed for this population that is really calling it emotion dysregulation head on. Next slide. Another area that was agreed on, communication and language were talked about in lots of different ways, but we really divide it into understanding, which is what they also call receptive communication, but that's like how much you comprehend. And that was thought to be really important, but it was decided in the first project that expression, or how you output, which parents need in order to be able to understand what the child needs, that was going to be the priority. And so I really put up here that can include speech or verbal output using words. It can mean language in an AAC or sign language, but it can also mean other ways of nonverbal expression like gestures. So it can mean a lot of things, and we wanted to have a really broad net as communication because we know that sentences and verbal output is not necessarily where a lot of kids are right now. So we wanted to work with where they are at the moment. Next. And so we've got some tests that we've used for this. Some are tests that kids do themselves by being able to point either to words that they know or say the words when they see pictures. Others are parent questionnaires that are talking about what the kids can do, how they can use language to go back and forth and converse or not, and things like that. And so different kinds of measures exist for this. Next. And then the last one is fine motor, which is part of motor development, where we either have gross motor, which is really walking and using our arms and legs to move and sit up and be able to get around. Fine motor is more just that using your hands to pick things up, to eat, to brush your teeth, to draw, and really do things that are more focused on those daily living skills. That was decided to be the focus, the priority. Again, not discounting gross motor, but that if we had to pick, we were going to pick fine motor. Next. And so that's measured again, both by having a child be able to do things during tests, play with blocks, put puzzles together, draw, you put pegs in things. And then it's also been asked about in the adaptive behavior measure, again, through questions about can the child draw, how do they use a fork, how do they use a spoon, and things like that. So we think our assumption is that we're going to need to do things both ways, asking parents about home, but also testing kids in person. But those are things that we'll be talking about, and also about what the FDA wants, because they seem to want both. But we will be tackling those questions. Next. So I think that's it. We have lots of references about studies and about these measures themselves that we can provide. We're going to do a lit review on our own so we can give you more information. But we just wanted to kind of put out there what all of these things really are and sort of what we've done about measuring them so far as a starting point. And yeah, that's okay. Autism was something else that we're not going to include here right now, but it's something that we're thinking about. So I will turn it back to you, Heidi.
Okay, that was awesome. And I learned something new and deeper every time you talk, Audrey. So thank you. So I wanted to recap at the end after we got through all of this, our primary goal of this project before we ask you to sign up. If you're interested, we're going to develop considerations for CTD and GAMT outcome measurement tools as a companion to our core outcome set. And next slide. We are going to be having 3 mentors from the first project join this project, and their role will be a little different, and we'll discuss that. And then we're going to have 20 caregivers that will be joining as new partners on this project. And we are looking for both GAMT and CTD. We are open to people outside the US, doesn't matter where you live. We're also open to people who are non-English speakers, and we have some ideas around how we will accommodate that so that they have the opportunity to engage and learn and contribute as well. Next slide. So what is the commitment? If you are one of the 20 new parents, the commitment will be to attend a monthly meeting. They're an hour and a half long, and we offer them at 2 different times on each month so that you can find one that works for your time zone. If you are waking up in Australia or going to bed in Europe or working during the day in the US, there should be something that will work for you. The meetings will run from next month, October 2024, through June of 2026. And like I mentioned, we're having the focus group type meeting. It's called a research jam that will take place during November for our November meeting, November 14th or 15th. You'll have choices on the date and time for that required meeting. And then you'll have a a short interview with one of those mentors, one of those 3 returning parents. We did this in the first project, and it was, I think, everyone's favorite part. You'll do an interview, and then they'll put together a presentation, some slides. They'll have a script and ask you specific questions, so it'll be really easy. And then you'll practice the slides with them and present the slides in one of our monthly meetings. So the monthly meetings at first will be training focused, and then the training will be shorter, and you'll be weighing in on the project as it goes forward, such as, are we phrasing things in a family-friendly way in this community survey? Or what do you think about how we've created these social media outreach materials, and what are your suggestions for improvement? And then we'll also be hearing from 2 to 3 parents at each meeting as they share their slides. And then lastly, you will be attending the 2026 symposium. And we do have, as part of this grant, some funding to provide a small stipend every 6 months during the 2 years, and also to get you to that meeting in 2026, and provide 1 hotel room for you. And the next slide. So the mentor commitment, I know we have a lot of returning folks thinking about this, and we have 3 mentor positions. You will receive a stipend and be a team member if you can attend the monthly meeting. You would only have to attend 1. You don't have to attend both. And for both of these, we've said 75% or greater attendance. And in some situations, there'll be a conflict, and you'll just let us know ahead of time that you can't make it and that you need to review the recording. And then you'll let us know and confirm that you watched the recording, and that will be fine too. But most of the time, all of our parents in the first project had like 80% or greater attendance. Everyone really was excited to show up each month. So I don't think this is going to be a hard commitment for anyone. But life happens, and conflicts happen. So the research jam is also mandatory for the mentors, and the mentors will have 1 additional meeting where they'll meet with our core team just to help with planning and check in, and they'll help plan those interview questions and help even more heavily with preparing for the survey, things like that. They will interview, each of them, 1/3 of the parents, and help with preparing slides and practicing the presentations and coming to the symposium as well. Next slide. So next steps, how to apply. There is a form now on the website. It's /PAReNts is the URL. And you can click that little, we changed it a little, actually. We should have taken a new screenshot, but there is a button that says apply to join PAReNts 2.0. You'll want to click that button and fill out the form. And if you can do that by September 15th, that gives you 9 days to let us know that you are interested. We really hope that everybody that's interested will be able to be involved. That's what happened the first time around. But if not, then we will look at all of your responses and try to pick the most diverse group of participants. We will be asking you if you have a child with a creatine deficiency, if it's GAMT or CTD. We'll also want you to think about what you learned from Dr. Thurm today, and answer the question, which of the core outcomes do you feel affect your patient with creatine deficiencies? So again, we get good diverse participation, and can learn about the different disorders and the different effects that they're having in our community. But again, I hope everyone is going to be able to participate that wants to. We'll let you know by the end of this month, and our first meeting will be very close after that on October 4th. And we'll be offering a 9 a.m. Pacific and a 2:30 Pacific. So if you want to pencil that in on your calendar, if you're feeling like you probably want to do this, you might want to hold that 90-minute spot, and reach out if you have any questions. But I think all the information is on there. Next slide. So that is all we have, and I'm looking in the Q&A, and there are no questions. But maybe we just had you all drinking from a fire hose. So if you have any questions, we'll remain on for a few minutes and try to answer any questions you have. We can push stop record, Emily, in case anyone wants to stick around and come off camera or ask more questions. We can do that. And Emily has put